Hey folks, I know I am just an old guy telling stories, but please leave a like and subscribe before we start. Let's enjoy in today's stories. Before I dive into today's stories, I want to say, disclaimer. The content presented in the video is purely for entertainment purposes only. The theories and stories discussed in this video are speculative and are not supported by any evidence or proof. Viewer discretion is advised. Alright, so before you judge me for being reckless, I just need to explain where my head was at. I'm not some idiot who jumps on sketchy deals or thinks the dark web is a playground for curious people. I know better than that, or at least I thought I did. But when you're staring at the screen of your laptop late at night and you see a deal so good it feels like destiny, well, you start to make some really dumb decisions. Let me back up. My name's Ryan, and I've been obsessed with cars for as long as I can remember. I'm not just talking about posters of Lamborghinis or playing Need for Speed as a kid. I'm talking about real obsession. I follow every car page on Instagram, I watch every new review on YouTube, and I know the specs of just about every exotic car out there. Problem is, I've never been able to afford any of them. I work a decent 9 to 5 at an insurance company, but you're not buying a Ferrari on a mid-level salary, you know? So about 3 weeks ago, I was messing around online trying to see if I could find any hidden gem deals on used sports cars. It started innocent enough. Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, the usual places. But everything was either overpriced or completely trashed. That's when I remembered something a guy at work told me a few months ago. He was into conspiracy theories and always going on about the dark web, saying you could buy anything there. Fake passports, stolen electronics, even cars. At first I brushed him off, but the thought stuck in my head. What if there were real deals out there, like cars being sold under the table? I mean, sure, it's probably stolen stuff, but how would anyone trace it back to me? I'm just the buyer, so curiosity, no, desperation got the better of me and I downloaded Tor. For those of you who don't know, Tor is a browser that lets you access the dark web. You can't just Google stuff like dark web car sales, obviously. You need special .onion links, which I found by poking around on forums. Most of the links were dead or led to sketchy websites selling stuff like counterfeit IDs or hacked Netflix accounts. It was like wandering through a virtual flea market of illegal junk. And then I found it. The site was called Prime Motors Direct. Yeah, super generic name, but the homepage had pictures of luxury cars, all listed for a fraction of their real value. Ferraris, Lambos, even a Bugatti, most of them going for the price of a used Toyota Corolla. It felt too good to be true, but it didn't have the usual scammy vibe. There were detailed descriptions, mileage, VIN numbers, and even reviews from satisfied customers. I figured the site was probably selling stolen cars, and that's why they were so cheap. But here's the thing. I didn't care. This wasn't about morality. This was about me getting the car of my dreams for a price I could actually afford. One car in particular caught my eye, a red 2017 Ferrari 488 GTB, listed for $12,000. For reference, this car is worth around $200,000. I clicked on it, and there was a full page of photos. It was immaculate, no scratches, no dents, and only 9,000 miles on the odometer. The description said it was a private sale, and delivery was included in the price. That should have been my first red flag, right? But I was too caught up in the fantasy of owning a Ferrari. The payment method was Bitcoin, which, of course, added to the sketchiness. I didn't own any crypto, so I had to spend the next couple of hours setting up a wallet and figuring out how to convert my money. It was a pain, but eventually I transferred the $12,000 and got a confirmation email. The email was super professional, which made me feel a little better. It said my car would arrive within 3 days and gave me a tracking link. The site even had customer service. I emailed them just to test it, asking a question about the paperwork, and they responded within an hour, saying the title would be included with the car. Looking back, that was probably fake reassurance to make me feel safe. The next 2 days were the longest of my life. I didn't tell anyone what I'd done, not even my brother, who's usually my go-to for everything. I knew he'd freak out and tell me I was being an idiot, so I kept it to myself and tried to act normal. even though I could barely focus on anything. I kept refreshing the tracking link like it was Christmas Eve, and I was waiting for Santa. Then on the third day, it showed up. I don't even know how they got it onto my street without anyone noticing. I live in a pretty quiet suburb, and the sight of a bright red Ferrari rolling off the back of an unmarked truck isn't exactly subtle. The delivery guy didn't even knock on my door. By the time I opened it, the car was just sitting in my driveway, with a folder on the driver's seat labeled Documents. It was perfect. I mean perfect. The paint glistened in the sunlight. The leather interior smelled new and the engine purred when I turned the key. The folder had a title, registration papers, and even a bill of sale. All of it looked legit. For the first time in my life, I felt like I'd won. But, as you've probably guessed by now, the high didn't last long. The first sign of trouble came that night. I'd just parked the car in my garage and locked up for the night when I got a call from a blocked number. I normally don't answer those, but something told me I should. "Is this Ryan?" a deep voice asked. "Yeah, who's this?" "This is Detective Owens with the state police. We need to speak with you regarding a recent purchase you made." I froze. How the hell did they know? Before I could respond, the line went dead. That's when I noticed the second thing, the folder. I hadn't paid much attention to it after taking the papers out, but now, under the dim light of my kitchen, I saw something sticking out of the bottom. A photograph. I pulled it out and my stomach dropped. It was a picture of the Ferrari parked in a driveway. But it wasn't my driveway, it was someone else's. And standing next to the car was a man. His face was circled in red marker with the word "removed" scrawled underneath. I didn't sleep that night. Alright, so after that night, the blocked call and the photo in the folder, I knew I was in way over my head. I mean, it didn't take a genius to connect the dots. The guy in the photo? Probably the previous owner of the car. The word "removed"? That's what made it even worse. It was like someone wanted me to know what had happened to him. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every creak of my house settling, every car driving past, I felt like someone was about to kick down my door. But no one came, and by the time the sun came up, I was just sitting at my kitchen table, staring at the photo. My coffee had gone cold, and my hands were shaking. I'm not the kind of person who deals with the police much. I've never been in trouble for anything more than a parking ticket, but the blocked call from the detective? That was eating at me. If the cops already knew about the car, how long until they came banging on my door? And what was I supposed to say? Oh yeah, I bought a Ferrari on the dark web for 12 grand, and I have no idea what's going on. That's not going to fly. I decided I needed a lawyer. Now, hiring a lawyer isn't exactly something I know how to do. It's not like you can just Google "lawyer for suspicious Ferrari purchases," right? But I did my best. I searched for criminal defense attorneys in my area and found one with decent reviews. His name was Andrew Miller, and his office was about 20 minutes away from me. I called him as soon as his office opened. "Andrew Miller's office," a receptionist answered. "Hi, I need to speak to Mr. Miller. It's kind of an urgent legal matter," I said, trying not to sound like a lunatic. "What kind of legal matter?" "It's about a purchase I made. I think it might involve stolen property. I really need help." There was a long pause before she said, "Hold on. Let me see if he's available." A couple of minutes later, Andrew himself got on the line. His voice was calm, professional. "So, you're saying you purchased something that might be stolen?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "But it's not just that. There are weird circumstances around it. I got a call from a detective, and I don't know what's going on, but I think I'm in trouble." "Okay," he said. "Why don't you come into my office? Bring any paperwork or documentation you have about the purchase, and we'll figure this out." I booked an appointment for that afternoon, and spent the rest of the morning gathering everything I had. The folder from the car, the email receipt, screenshots of the website, even the Bitcoin transaction confirmation. I also printed out the photo I'd found in the folder, though I wasn't sure if I should show it to him yet. When I got to Andrew's office, I was a nervous wreck. He had one of those typical small-town law offices, fake leather chairs, framed diplomas on the wall, a coffee machine that looked like it hadn't been cleaned in years. Andrew himself was in his mid-40s, clean-shaven, with that kind of "trust me, I've seen worse" vibe. "So tell me everything," he said, motioning for me to sit. I laid it all out for him: the dark web, the car, the delivery, the blocked call. I didn't tell him about the photo yet. I wasn't sure how he'd react to that. When I was done, he leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against his desk. "All right," he said. "First things first. Yes, you're in a bad situation. But it's not hopeless. The fact that you came to me before the police showed up is a good thing. It shows you're being proactive." "What do I do?" I asked. "Well, the first question is whether the car is stolen. If it is, that's a problem, but the fact that you didn't know it was stolen could work in your favor. That's called lack of intent. You didn't knowingly buy a stolen vehicle, so the charges would be less severe, if there are any charges at all." I nodded, though it didn't make me feel much better. "The second issue," he continued, "is the paperwork. You said the title and registration came with the car?" "Yeah," I said, pulling them out of the folder. He examined them for a moment, frowning. "These look legit, but they could be forged. I'll need to run the VIN number to make sure it matches the title and isn't flagged in any databases." "What about the detective who called me?" I asked. "Why would he already know about the car?" "That's the part I'm not sure about," Andrew admitted. "If the police are already looking at you, it might mean the car is linked to a bigger investigation. You might just be collateral damage." "Collateral damage?" "Look, I don't want to scare you, but sometimes stolen property, especially high-value items like cars, can be tied to organized crime. If that's the case, the police might see you as a lead, even if you're innocent." My stomach dropped. "Here's what I'm going to do," Andrew said, sliding the paperwork back to me. "I'll run the VIN number and check for any red flags. In the meantime, you need to lay low. Don't drive the car, don't post anything about it online, and don't answer any calls from blocked numbers. If the police contact you again, call me immediately. Do not speak to them without me present. Got it?" "Yeah," I said, swallowing hard. As I was getting ready to leave, I hesitated. "There's one more thing," I said, pulling out the photo. Andrew looked at it for a long time. His expression didn't change, but I could tell he didn't like what he was seeing. "Where did you find this?" he asked. "It was in the folder with the documents." "This changes things," he said, sliding the photo into a file folder. "I'll need to hold on to this for now. If this man is the previous owner of the car, and if he's missing, the police might suspect you had something to do with it." "You didn't, right?" "Of course not," I said. "Good. Then we'll get ahead of this. But I need you to tell me everything. No secrets, no surprises. If you leave something out and it comes up later, it'll look bad, understand?" "Yeah, I get it." "All right, go home, and I'll call you as soon as I know more." Driving back, I couldn't stop thinking about what Andrew had said. Organized crime, stolen property, missing people. What the hell had I gotten myself into? When I pulled into my driveway, I noticed something strange. The garage door was open. I was 100% sure I'd closed it before I left. When I saw my garage door wide open, I froze in the driver's seat. My first thought was that someone had broken in, maybe trying to steal the Ferrari. But when I peeked inside, nothing seemed out of place. The car was still there, parked exactly where I left it. I checked the locks on the house, too. Everything was intact. At this point, I didn't know if I was being paranoid or if something was genuinely off. Andrew's warning about laying low kept ringing in my head. So I closed the garage, locked up the house, and tried to stay calm. I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe I'd hit the button on the remote accidentally. That night I got another call. This time the number wasn't blocked. "Ryan, this is Detective Owens. I believe we spoke briefly before," the voice said. It was the same guy who'd called me before, but this time he didn't hang up. I felt a lump forming in my throat, but I forced myself to stay calm. Yeah, what's this about?" "I need to meet with you in person," he said. "This isn't something we can discuss over the phone." My stomach sank. "Am I in trouble?" "Not if you cooperate," he said. "We're not looking at you as a suspect. You're more of a key witness, and we need your help." That didn't make me feel much better, but I agreed to meet him the next morning at a diner about 15 minutes from my house. Andrew had told me to call him if the police reached out again, so I immediately shot him a text and explained the situation. He called me back within minutes. "All right, here's the deal," Andrew said. "Go to the meeting, but don't say anything that could implicate you. If they try to pressure you into something, let me know right away, and don't sign anything without me." The next morning I showed up at the diner. It was one of those old-school places with booths and a long counter, the kind of place where the waitresses still call you honey. Detective Owens was already there, sitting in a corner booth with a cup of coffee. He was in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Thanks for coming," he said, motioning for me to sit. "Yeah, sure," I said, sliding into the booth across from him. He didn't waste any time. "The car you purchased is part of an ongoing investigation. We believe it's connected to a larger criminal operation, one involving theft, money laundering, and possibly worse." I swallowed hard. "Okay, but I didn't know any of that when I bought it. I didn't even meet anyone in person. It just showed up at my house." "We know," he said. "That's why we're not looking to arrest you. You're not the first person to get caught up in this scheme. These guys are running an underground network, moving stolen cars through the dark web. They're using people like you, buyers who don't ask too many questions, as a way to clean the goods." "So what happens now?" I asked. "This is where you come in," he said, leaning forward. "We need to catch these guys in the act, and you're in a unique position to help us do that. Since you've already made contact with them, we want you to make another purchase." "Another purchase?" I said, my voice rising. "Are you serious? You want me to go back on the dark web and buy another car? Do you know how sketchy that is?" "I understand your hesitation," Owen said, his tone firm. "But this is our best shot at shutting them down. We'll provide the money for the purchase, and we'll monitor the transaction every step of the way. You won't be alone in this." I sat back, trying to process what he was saying. This wasn't just about me anymore. These guys were running a full-blown operation, and if I didn't help, someone else might get caught in the same mess, or worse. "Do I have a choice?" I asked. Owens sighed. "Technically, yes, but if you refuse, you're going to be under a lot more scrutiny. This way, we can protect you. You help us, we help you. Simple as that." I knew Andrew would probably tell me not to agree to anything without him, but in that moment, I felt like I didn't have a choice. "Fine," I said. "I'll do it." "Good," Owen said, sliding a small folder across the table. "Here's how it's going to work. We've set up a Bitcoin wallet for you with the funds you'll need. You'll go back to the same site, find another car, and initiate the purchase. Once the transaction is complete, we'll step in and track the delivery." "And what happens when the car shows up?" I asked. "We'll take it from there," he said. "Our goal is to intercept the delivery and catch whoever's running this operation." The whole thing felt like something out of a bad cop drama. I mean, how was this my life now? But I nodded and took the folder, which contained detailed instructions on how to proceed. When I got home, I called Andrew to let him know what had happened. He wasn't thrilled about the idea of me working with the police, but he agreed that it might be my best option. "Just be careful," he said. "These guys are dangerous, and if the police screw this up, you're the one who's going to be stuck in the middle." That night, I logged back onto TOR and returned to the site. It looked the same as before. with rows of luxury cars listed for ridiculously low prices. This time I didn't feel the same excitement I had the first time around. Now it felt like I was walking into a trap. After scrolling for a while, I settled on a black Lamborghini Huracan. It was listed for $15,000, and the description said it was lightly used, with only 12,000 miles. I followed the police's instructions, transferring the Bitcoin and confirming the purchase. The email confirmation came through almost immediately. Just like last time, it said the car would arrive in 3 days. Now, all I could do was wait. But as the days passed, something started to feel off. The tracking link they gave me didn't work this time. And then, on the second day, I got another email, not from the site, but from a random encrypted address. It was a single line of text. You don't know who you're dealing with. When I saw the email with the line, "You don't know who you're dealing with," my heart sank. It wasn't like the other emails I'd gotten during this whole ordeal. There was no logo, no professional formatting, just a single sentence in plain text, sent from an address that looked like it had been scrambled by some kind of encryption software. I immediately forwarded the email to Detective Owens and called him to let him know what had happened. "Did you respond to the email?" he asked, his tone sharper than usual. "No, of course not. Should I have?" "No," he said quickly. "Good. We'll look into it. For now, stick to the plan." But the thing was, the plan didn't feel as solid anymore. The tracking link for the Lamborghini still wasn't working, and the lack of updates was driving me insane. Every time I tried to ask Owens for an update, he told me to sit tight and let them handle it. By the time the third day rolled around, I was a nervous wreck. The first car, the Ferrari, had shown up like clockwork, but this time there was nothing. No delivery truck, no folder, no signs that the car was even coming. I stayed glued to my window all day, waiting for something, but the driveway stayed empty. Around 8 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was Owens. "Ryan, we've got something," he said, not bothering with any kind of greeting. "The car isn't coming to your house." "What do you mean?" I asked. "The delivery route's changed. They must have figured out we're monitoring the transaction. Our tech team traced the vehicle to a warehouse on the outskirts of the city. We're moving in tonight." "Wait, what? What about me?" "You've done your part," he said. "Stay home and let us handle this. We've got a team on the ground." I wanted to feel relieved, but something about the whole situation felt wrong. If the criminals behind this operation knew the police were watching, why would they risk using the same warehouse? It felt too easy, like they were setting a trap of their own. Still, I wasn't about to argue with Owens. I stayed home, pacing around my living room, trying to distract myself. I was halfway through scrolling my Instagram feed when my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text. "They're using you." It was from the same encrypted number that had sent the email the day before. My hand started shaking as I stared at the screen. How did they know my number? How did they know what was happening? I called Owens again, but he didn't pick up. It went straight to voicemail. "Hey, I just got another message," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Call me back when you get this." I hung up and sat there staring at my phone, waiting for a response. Nothing. An hour passed, then 2. I tried calling Owens again, but still no answer. Finally, I got tired of waiting and decided to call Andrew instead. If anyone could make sense of this, it was him. "Ryan, what's going on?" he asked as soon as he picked up. I explained everything, the email, the text, the sudden change in the delivery route. Andrew was silent for a moment, and I could almost hear him thinking through the situation. "Look, I don't like this," he said finally. "If they've changed the route, it means they're on to you. And if they're on to you, they're on to the police. This isn't just a sting anymore, it's a chess game. And right now you're a pawn." "What am I supposed to do?" I asked. "Stay put," he said. "Let the police handle it. If something goes sideways, you don't want to be anywhere near it." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Okay, I'll wait." But I didn't have to wait long. Around midnight, my phone rang again. This time, it wasn't a blocked number or an encrypted message. It was Owen's. "We need you to come to the station," he said, his voice tight. "What? Why?" "I'll explain when you get here. Just get here now." I didn't like the sound of that, but I grabbed my keys and drove to the police station. When I walked in, Owens was waiting for me in the lobby. He looked tired. Not just physically, but mentally, like the weight of the night had finally caught up to him. "What's going on?" I asked. "The warehouse was a bust," he said, running a hand through his hair. "We moved in, but it was empty. No cars, no people, nothing. Just an empty building." "So, what does that mean?" "It means they played us," he said, his voice full of frustration. "They knew we were coming. They must have abandoned the location days ago. And now, they're in the wind." I felt a sinking feeling in my chest. "So that's it? They're just gone?" "Not exactly," Owen said. "We found something in the warehouse. A message." He handed me a photo, and my stomach dropped. It was a picture of me, sitting in my living room. It had clearly been taken through the window of my house and scrawled across the bottom in red marker were the words, "Stop digging." I stared at the photo, my mind racing. What does this mean? "It means you're not just a witness anymore," Owen said. "You're a target." When Owen showed me the photo of myself sitting in my living room, I felt my stomach twist into a knot. Someone had been watching me. Someone had been close enough to take that picture and leave it behind as a warning. And now, I was at the center of this whole mess. "Do you have any idea who took this?" I asked, barely able to keep my voice steady. Owen shook his head. "We're working on tracing it back, but these guys don't leave much of a trail. This photo is their way of telling us to back off. They're spooked, which means we're getting close, but it also means they're desperate and dangerous." "Great," I muttered. "So now I've got a bunch of criminals who think I'm the reason their operation is falling apart?" "Listen," Owen said, lowering his voice. "We're going to put you in protective custody for a while, just until we figure out our next move." "Protective custody," I repeated. "What does that even mean? Am I just supposed to disappear from my life, my job, my house?" "For now, yes," he said. "This isn't optional, Ryan. These people know where you live. They've already been there. If you stay, you're putting yourself and anyone close to you in danger." I didn't argue. I knew he was right, but that didn't make it any easier to accept. The next couple of hours were a blur. Owens had an officer drive me home to grab a few essentials, but I wasn't allowed to stay long. As I packed, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. Every shadow outside the window, every passing car, it all felt wrong. By the time I was taken to the safe house, I was completely drained. It wasn't anything fancy, just a small, nondescript apartment on the other side of town. It had basic furniture, blackout curtains, and a Wi-Fi connection that barely worked. The police posted someone outside to keep watch, but other than that, I was completely alone. For the next few days, I did nothing but wait. No work, no social media, no contact with anyone except Owens and Andrew. I wasn't even allowed to tell my family where I was. The isolation was suffocating, but it was better than the alternative. Finally, on the fourth day, Owens called with an update. "We found the cars," he said. "Wait, what?" I sat up on the couch, nearly dropping my phone. "They moved the inventory to another warehouse, but this time we caught a break. One of our undercover officers managed to intercept a shipment. The cars were being prepped for transport overseas." "That's good, right?" "It's a step in the right direction," Owen said. "We've identified a few key players in the operation, and we're closing in on the person running the whole thing, but there's something else you need to know." "What is it?" "There's evidence that suggests these guys aren't just dealing in stolen cars," he said carefully. "They're involved in a larger criminal network, fraud, identity theft. And they've been using the dark web to recruit unsuspecting buyers like you to launder their profits. That's why they've been so meticulous about covering their tracks. I felt like the floor was falling out from under me. So, what does this mean for me? Am I still in danger? For now, yes, Owens admitted, but we're keeping a close eye on things. The good news is, your cooperation has given us a lot of leverage. If this goes to trial, your testimony could be the key to taking them down. That wasn't exactly comforting, but at least it felt like we were making progress. For the next few weeks, things started to quiet down. The safe house became my new normal, and I slowly adjusted to the idea of living under police protection. I kept in touch with Andrew, who assured me that I wasn't facing any legal trouble. As long as you keep cooperating, you'll be fine, he said. But then, just when I thought things were settling down, I got one final email. It came late at night from the same encrypted address as before. This time it wasn't a warning. It was a simple question. Was it worth it? I stared at the screen for a long time, unsure how to respond, or if I even should. The question was haunting, though. Was it worth it? Was buying that car, chasing that dream, worth everything I'd been through? Looking back now, I know the answer. It wasn't. The Ferrari was impounded, of course, and I never saw it again. I'm still working with the police as they wrap up their investigation, but I've done my best to move on with my life. The whole experience taught me a hard lesson about greed and temptation, and about how the things that seem too good to be true almost always are. If you're listening this, take my advice. Stay away from the dark web. Don't let desperation or curiosity pull you into something you don't understand, because once you're in, getting out isn't as easy as clicking log off. As for me, I'm trying to rebuild. I sold my old car and used the money to buy something safe and boring, a used Honda Accord. It's not flashy, and it's definitely not a Ferrari, but it gets me where I need to go. And honestly, that's all I really need. Alright, I know how this sounds. I bought a cursed McLaren off the dark web. Trust me, I'm not one of those people who spends their days browsing creepy forums looking for weird things to waste money on. I'm just a regular guy, okay? 33, single, work-from-home IT consultant, decent apartment, love pizza way too much. It's a miracle I'm not shaped like a pizza myself. My point is, I'm not some reckless thrill seeker. I just have a soft spot for cars, particularly ones I can never afford in a million years. Well, I couldn't afford them until I found this listing. Let me backtrack for a second. My obsession with McLarens started when I was a kid. I used to have this little die-cast McLaren F1 model that I got for Christmas one year. I would sit on the floor staring at it for hours, imagining I was tearing down the streets of Monaco or Tokyo like a Formula One driver. Fast forward to adulthood, and the dream never really faded. I knew I'd never have the cash for something that crazy. My Corolla from 2008 is still sitting in my parking lot as we speak. But a man can dream. Anyway, this whole thing started because of a random Reddit thread. I was procrastinating at work, scrolling through r/cars, and someone posted a picture of a McLaren 720S they spotted in London. Naturally, the comments were full of people debating whether it was worth the price tag, how it compares to Lambos, and so on. But then, one guy mentioned something bizarre. There's this cursed McLaren floating around on the dark web. People say everyone who's owned it has died under weird circumstances. Now, I'm not one to believe in curses or anything like that. I grew up Catholic, sure, but I'm not exactly a practicing anything at this point. Still, the idea was too ridiculous to ignore. I mean, come on, a cursed supercar? That's the kind of thing you see in bad Netflix horror movies. So I did the most logical thing. I Googled it. Nothing came up on the surface web, of course. But I was curious enough to dust off my old Tor browser, fire up DuckDuckGo, and dive into the sketchy underbelly of the internet. I know what you're thinking. Why do I even have Tor installed? Let's just say I've dabbled in crypto trading, and not all coins are exactly mainstream. But I digress. After a bit of digging through forums and shady marketplace links, I found it, the listing. The title was straightforward: McLaren 720S, cursed, previous owners deceased, $25,000, BTC only. Yeah, $25,000. For a car that costs $300,000 new. That was the first red flag. The description was short and to the point. Lightly used McLaren 720S, orange, 7,235 miles on the odometer. Vehicle history available upon request. Warning: this vehicle is reportedly cursed by its first owner. All subsequent owners have suffered untimely deaths. Serious inquiries only. Delivery included. Non-refundable, seller not responsible for accidents or injuries. Bitcoin payment required. Now, I'm not proud of what I did next, but hear me out. I've always considered myself lucky. Like, freakishly lucky. I've won raffles I didn't even know I entered. I've avoided car accidents by seconds. I once found $500 in an old coat pocket. Money I have zero memory of putting there. So in my head I figured, if anyone's going to break the curse, it's me. The seller didn't even bother hiding their email address. They straight up listed it in the ad. I shot them a message through an encrypted email account I'd set up for sketchy online purchases. Don't judge me, okay? The reply came back almost instantly. Send BTC to this address. Delivery in 3 to 5 business days. No further questions will be answered. Sketchy, right? But $25,000 for a McLaren was just too good to pass up, curse or no curse. Besides, if it turned out to be a scam, I could just write it off as a lesson learned. So I transferred the Bitcoin, closed my laptop, and tried to forget about it. 3 days later, a car carrier truck pulled up in front of my apartment. I swear I almost fainted when I saw the thing. It was real. Bright orange, pristine condition, not a scratch on it. The delivery guy didn't even ask for a signature. He just unloaded it, handed me the key fob, and left without saying a word. The first thing I did was check the VIN. It matched the listing. It was all legit. The mileage, the specs, everything was as advertised. The only thing off was a faint smell coming from the interior. Not bad, just off, like burnt plastic mixed with old leather. That night, I went through the glove box and found an envelope labeled Owner History. I wasn't expecting much, but what I found inside still sends chills. Sorry, it was unsettling. There were 4 names listed, each followed by a date of death. Marcus O'Connell, September 14th, 2018. Sarah Liu, March 2nd, 2019. Anthony Ramirez, August 26th, 2019. Tyler Jensen, December 15th, 2021. No explanations, no details, just names and dates. I Googled every single one of them. Turns out they were all real people, and each of them had died in freak accidents. Marcus was hit by a falling tree during a storm. Sarah had a heart attack while jogging, at 32 years old. Anthony was found drowned in his own swimming pool, even though he was an experienced swimmer. And Tyler, well, Tyler was the weirdest of all. He died in his sleep, but the cause of death was listed as undetermined. I should have stopped there. I should have called the cops or a priest or literally anyone, but instead I grabbed the key fob, hopped into the driver's seat and took it for a spin. That's when things started getting strange. The first time I sat in the McLaren, it felt surreal. Everything about it screamed luxury. The buttery leather seats, the sleek digital dashboard, the way the steering wheel fit perfectly into my hands. For a guy whose car experience peaked with a 2008 Corolla and Honda Civic, this was like stepping into a spaceship. But as soon as I pressed the start button, something felt off. The engine roared to life, but the sound wasn't quite right. It wasn't the smooth, throaty growl I expected from a car like this. Instead, it sounded rough, like it hadn't been driven in years. I brushed it off as nerves. After all, I'd never driven a supercar before. I decided to take it out for a drive around my neighborhood, just to see how it felt. Nothing crazy, just a few laps to get a feel for the power. The car handled like a dream, smooth acceleration, tight steering, and brakes that could probably stop time itself. But about 10 minutes in, I noticed something odd. The car's built-in GPS had switched on by itself. Now I know these cars are loaded with fancy tech, so I figured maybe I accidentally bumped something. But the screen wasn't showing my current location. Instead, it displayed an address I didn't recognize. 1462 Hollow Pine Road. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe the previous owner had programmed it. Or maybe it was just a glitch. But when I tried to turn it off, the screen froze. Then the weirdest thing happened. The voice navigation kicked in. Turn left at Maple Drive. I hadn't even entered a destination, but the car was acting like it wanted me to follow this route. I laughed it off, thinking it was some kind of software bug, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was intentional. Still, I was curious. Hollow Pine Road wasn't far from where I lived, maybe a 20-minute drive tops. It was one of those rural roads just outside of town, lined with old farmhouses and fields that stretched for miles. I figured it couldn't hurt to check it out. If nothing else, it'd make for a cool story to tell my friends. As I drove, I noticed the GPS didn't give me the option to reroute or cancel. Every time I tried to mess with it, the screen would glitch, like it was overriding me. I'm not proud to admit it, but I started talking to the car. "All right, car, what's your deal? You taking me to some secret McLaren owners club, or what?" The joke felt hollow. By the time I reached the outskirts of town, the road started getting narrower. The streetlights disappeared, and the pavement turned to gravel. I realized I hadn't seen another car in at least 10 minutes, which was weird for a Friday night. Even weirder, my cell signal had completely dropped. I tried refreshing Instagram just to check, but nothing loaded. Finally, I saw a sign, Hollow Pine Road, 1 mile ahead. I hesitated. I wasn't stupid. I knew this whole thing sounded like the start of a bad horror movie. But I told myself it was just a harmless glitch, or maybe some leftover setting from the car's previous owner. So, like an idiot, I kept driving. When I reached Hollow Pine Road, it was pitch black. No houses, no streetlights, just a narrow dirt road surrounded by thick trees. The GPS showed a single blinking dot at the end of the road, like it was marking some kind of destination. I slowed down, rolling the car forward at a crawl. Then the smell hit me. It was faint at first, like something burning in the distance. Not wood, though, plastic. It reminded me of the weird smell I'd noticed earlier inside the car, but stronger. I checked the vents, thinking maybe the air conditioning was acting up, but they were fine. The GPS screen flickered again, and this time a new message popped up. "You've arrived." The dot on the map was gone. I stopped the car in the middle of the road, staring at the screen like an idiot. There was nothing around me but trees and shadows, yet the car was acting like I'd reached some kind of destination. I rolled down the window, half expecting to hear crickets or wind or something, but it was dead silent. That's when I noticed the engine was still idling. Only, it didn't sound like an engine anymore. The rough growl from earlier had returned, but now it was uneven, almost like it was struggling to run. I swear it sounded like breathing. I tried turning the car off, but the start-stop button wasn't responding. The lights on the dash flickered, and for a split second I could have sworn I saw something flash across the rearview camera. A shadow? A figure? I don't know. It was too fast to make out. And then the radio turned on. I hadn't touched it, and yet it was blasting static at full volume. I frantically turned the knob, trying to lower it, but it wouldn't budge. Then, through the static, I heard something. A voice. It was faint, distorted, like it was coming from far away, but I could make out a single word. Leave. I didn't need to be told twice. I threw the car into reverse and floored it, kicking up dirt as I sped back down Hollow Pine Road. The smell got stronger, filling the cabin like the car itself was burning from the inside. By the time I made it back to paved roads, the radio had gone silent, and the GPS had reset itself. It was like nothing had happened. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat there for a minute, just staring at the dashboard. Everything was back to normal. No weird smells, no strange noises, no cryptic GPS routes. I told myself it was all in my head, just a mix of nerves and my overactive imagination. But as I got out of the car, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There were handprints on the windshield, not on the inside, on the outside, and they weren't mine. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was scared, at least that's what I told myself, but because I needed answers. The handprints on the windshield. I had no explanation for that, and frankly, I didn't want one. All I knew was that something wasn't adding up. So I did what any rational person would do at 2 a.m. I grabbed my laptop and started digging. I already knew about the 4 previous owners from the envelope in the glove box, but I hadn't looked deeply into their lives. I figured if there really was some connection between them and the car, it had to be buried somewhere online. I started with the first name, Marcus O'Connell. Marcus was the guy who originally bought the McLaren brand new back in 2018. According to the articles I found, he was a young hedge fund manager in New York City. Wealthy, successful, the kind of guy who probably bought a $300,000 car like I'd buy a pair of sneakers. The news about his death was straightforward. He was crushed by a tree during a freak storm while driving the McLaren. Tragic, sure, but not exactly supernatural. Then I moved on to Sarah Lou, the second owner. She bought the car in early 2019 and barely had it 6 months before her death. The articles were vague, just saying she collapsed while jogging in a local park. But as I read further, I found a small detail that made me pause. The McLaren was parked in the lot where she'd been running. Witnesses said she'd arrived, sat in the car for about 15 minutes, and then started her jog. Next was Anthony Ramirez, the third owner. His death was more unusual. He was found drowned in his own pool, but what struck me was that neighbors reported seeing the McLaren idling in his driveway all night before anyone noticed something was wrong. No one ever explained why the car was running or who turned it on. Finally, there was Tyler Jensen, the most recent owner before me. Tyler's death had baffled medical examiners. It was undetermined, which basically means they couldn't figure out why a healthy 29-year-old just didn't wake up one morning. I couldn't find much about his connection to the car, except for one detail buried in a forum thread. Apparently, Tyler had tried to sell the McLaren weeks before he died. He posted on a luxury car marketplace, practically begging someone to take it off his hands. He even dropped the price to $10,000, insanely low for a car like that. One commenter asked him why he was selling it so cheap, and Tyler replied with just 2 words: "It's cursed." That word, cursed, kept popping up everywhere I looked. People on car forums, Reddit threads, even a random YouTube video about haunted objects. Everyone seemed to have some version of the same story. The McLaren brought bad luck. Owners got sick, accidents happened, weird things started piling up. And yet every time the car changed hands, someone else would buy it. Why? Because no one could resist the deal. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the glowing screen of my laptop. I was starting to feel like an idiot. I mean, I didn't believe in curses, at least not really. But the coincidences were stacking up, and I couldn't ignore them anymore. I decided it was time to reach out to someone who might actually know what was going on. Using the email address from the original dark web listing, I sent the seller another message. I need to know the truth about this car. What's wrong with it? Why are all the owners dead? To my surprise, they replied almost immediately. "You bought it. It's your problem now. Don't contact me again." Helpful, right? By now I was running out of options. I thought about calling the police, but what was I supposed to tell them? "Hey, I bought a car on the dark web and now I think it's cursed." Yeah, that'd go over great. Besides, the car was legally mine. I had the title, the registration, the whole deal. It wasn't like I could just return it. Then I remembered something. When I was reading about Marcus O'Connell, the first owner, I came across a mention of a charity event he'd attended a few months before his death. It was some high-profile gala in Manhattan where he'd showcased the McLaren as part of a silent auction. One of the articles mentioned he'd gotten the car customized for the event, adding a bunch of personal touches to make it stand out. Maybe whatever was wrong with the car started there. I started looking for the customization shop he'd used, and after about an hour I found it. Silverline Customs, a boutique auto shop based in New Jersey. They specialized in high-end cars, and according to their Instagram page, they'd done work for everyone from pro athletes to actors. I figured it was a long shot, but I decided to call them the next morning. When I finally got through to someone, I didn't mention the curse or the deaths. I just said I'd recently bought a McLaren 720S that they'd worked on back in 2018, and I wanted to know more about the customizations. The guy on the phone paused for a second, then said, "Oh yeah, I remember that one. Marcus's car, right? The orange one?" "Yeah, that's the one," I said. "Man, that car was weird. He wanted all this creepy custom stuff. Black suede interior, some engraving on the steering wheel, and a freaking..." He trailed off like he wasn't sure if he should keep going. "Oh, freaking what?" I pressed. The guy hesitated again, then said, "A lockbox." "A lockbox?" "Yeah, like a little safe. We installed it in the trunk. He was super specific about it. Said it had to be airtight, fireproof, bolted down. No idea what he put in there, though." A lockbox. My stomach sank as I realized I hadn't even checked the trunk since the car arrived. After I hung up, I grabbed the keys and headed outside. The McLaren was sitting in my driveway, gleaming in the morning sunlight like nothing had happened the night before. I opened the trunk and there it was, a small black lockbox tucked into a custom compartment. The lock was one of those heavy-duty combination types, the kind you'd see on a bank safe. I tried lifting the box, but it wouldn't budge. It was bolted down, just like the guy said. I had no idea what was inside, or why Marcus felt the need to keep it locked up so securely. But I knew one thing for sure. Whatever was in that box might be the key to understanding what was really going on with this car. I didn't open the lockbox right away. To be honest, I wasn't even sure how to start. The combination lock looked industrial grade, and without the code, I'd probably need heavy tools to break it open. Not exactly something I had lying around my apartment. Still, the idea of just leaving it alone didn't sit well with me. After pacing around my living room for half an hour, I decided to take the straightforward approach. I grabbed my phone, sat down at my desk, and started digging again. I figured if Marcus O'Connell was paranoid enough to install a custom lockbox in his McLaren, maybe he left a clue somewhere. Rich people love their secrets, but they also love leaving breadcrumbs for someone to find. I searched through every public record I could find on Marcus, old interviews, social media posts, even comments he'd left on random articles. Nothing about a combination. But then I stumbled onto a post on his old Instagram account. It was from 2018, a few months before his death. The post showed the McLaren parked outside what looked like a countryside mansion. The caption reading, "A masterpiece deserves the perfect safe haven. 914, home sweet home." At first, I didn't think much of it, but then it hit me, 914. Could that be the combination? I grabbed my jacket and headed back outside to the car. The morning sunlight made everything feel less ominous, almost like the events of the previous night were a bad dream. But the lockbox in the trunk was all too real. I turned the dials on the combination lock, 914. The lock clicked open. Now, here's where things got weird. I expected to find something expensive or incriminating inside, jewelry, cash, maybe even documents that Marcus didn't want anyone else to see. Instead, I found something completely unexpected. A stack of old, weathered photographs. There were maybe 10 or 12 photos in total, all of them black and white, and they looked like they'd been taken decades ago. Most of them showed the same thing, an old stone building surrounded by trees. It looked abandoned, with broken windows and ivy crawling up the walls. The building didn't ring any bells, but there was something written on the back of each photo. Coordinates. I didn't even need to think twice. I ran back inside, pulled up Google Maps, and plugged in the first set of coordinates. They pointed to a location about 100 miles away from me, out in the middle of nowhere. I tried the rest of the coordinates, and they all pointed to the same spot. What was this place? Why did Marcus have these photos? And why go through all the trouble of locking them away in a custom box? By now, my curiosity had completely taken over. I told myself I'd just drive out there, take a quick look, and come right back. Worst case scenario, it was some kind of prank or a leftover project from Marcus's life. Best case scenario, it had helped me understand what was going on with the car. The drive took about 2 hours, and the closer I got to the coordinates, the more rural the area became. Paved roads turned to gravel, then to dirt, until I was surrounded by nothing but fields and forest. I passed a few old farmhouses along the way, but most of them looked abandoned. No cell service, no other cars, just me and the McLaren cutting through the wilderness. When I finally reached the location, I almost missed it. The stone building from the photos was hidden behind a thick wall of trees, barely visible from the road. I parked the car on the shoulder and made my way through the underbrush, my heart pounding with a mix of excitement and unease. The building looked even worse in person. Time hadn't been kind to it. Half the roof had caved in and the walls were covered in graffiti and moss. The front door was missing entirely, and the inside was dark and empty, save for a few broken pieces of furniture scattered around. I spent about 20 minutes exploring, but nothing stood out. It was just an old, crumbling building in the middle of nowhere. I was starting to feel like I'd wasted my time until I spotted something carved into one of the walls. It was faint, barely visible beneath the layers of dirt and graffiti, but I could make out a series of numbers scratched into the stone. 09-14-18. Marcus's date of death. I stared at the numbers, trying to make sense of it. Had Marcus been here before? Did this place have something to do with his death? And why had he hidden photos of it in the car's lockbox? As I turned to leave, I noticed something else. A small metal plate embedded in the floor near the center of the building. It was about the size of a shoebox, and it looked like it had been bolted down long ago. My first thought was that it might be some kind of time capsule or hidden compartment, but I had no tools to open it. Frustrated, I made a note of the location and decided to head back home. Whatever was going on, I needed more information before I could go any further. The drive back felt different. The McLaren handled just as smoothly as before, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it knew I'd found something. The GPS stayed off, the dashboard lights didn't flicker, and yet I felt like I wasn't alone in the car. I parked in my driveway, locked the car, and went straight to my laptop. This time I started searching for any connections between Marcus O'Connell and the coordinates I'd visited. It took a while, but eventually I found a link. The stone building used to be part of an old sanitarium that shut down in the 1950s. It was one of those places with a shady history. Rumors of mistreatment, illegal experiments, all the usual stuff. Over the years, the property had been sold off and abandoned, leaving only the crumbling shell I'd visited. But here's the kicker. Marcus's great-uncle used to work there. I couldn't find much about the guy, other than that he'd been one of the head doctors at the sanitarium before it closed. But that one detail raised a million new questions. Why was Marcus keeping photos of the place? What was his connection to it? And more importantly, what did it have to do with the car? I didn't have the answers yet, but I was starting to get the sense that I was in way over my head. I barely slept that night. It wasn't fear keeping me up exactly. It was the overwhelming feeling that I was close to putting all the pieces together. The sanitarium, Marcus's great-uncle, the lockbox. It all had to mean something. I just didn't know what. By the time the sun came up, I'd made a decision. I was going back to the stone building. This time, I wasn't going in blind. I packed a flashlight, a crowbar, and a small tool kit I'd borrowed from my neighbor, Steve. Steve's one of those retired handyman types who never ask questions, so when I told him I needed to fix something on my car, he just nodded and handed me the tools. The drive back to the building was uneventful, though I couldn't shake the feeling that the McLaren wasn't entirely under my control. It drove perfectly, but the steering felt heavy, like it was subtly guiding me. I kept telling myself I was imagining things, but by the time I reached the dirt road leading to the building, my hands were practically glued to the wheel. When I got there, the place looked exactly as I'd left it. Quiet, empty, forgotten. I parked the car on the side of the road again and made my way back through the underbrush. The morning air was crisp and the sunlight filtering through the trees gave the whole scene an almost peaceful vibe. But I wasn't fooled. Something about this place felt wrong. Once inside, I headed straight for the metal plate I'd found the day before. It was still there, bolted into the floor like a tiny vault. I dropped to my knees and got to work with the crowbar, prying at the edges until the bolts finally gave way. What I found underneath wasn't what I expected. It wasn't a time capsule or a box of hidden treasures. It was a small sealed jar, glass about the size of a mason jar, but with some kind of black wax around the lid. There was something inside, but the glass was too fogged up to see clearly. The moment I touched the jar, a strange, almost metallic smell filled the air. It wasn't strong, just faint enough to notice, but it made me hesitate. I thought about leaving it there, but I knew I couldn't. Whatever this was, it had to be connected to the car and to Marcus. I slipped the jar into my backpack and hurried back to the McLaren. The second I got in, the dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree. The GPS, which had been quiet since I'd first gotten the car, suddenly came to life. But instead of showing a route, the screen was blank except for a single message. Return it. I stared at the screen, my hands gripping the wheel. Return what? I muttered under my breath. Of course, there was no answer, but deep down I knew exactly what it meant. The jar. I didn't know where to return it or why it was so important, but I couldn't ignore the message. I pulled out my phone, opened Google Maps, and started searching for anything that might give me a clue. That's when I saw it. A cemetery about 10 miles from the sanitarium. The cemetery's name, Hollow Pine Cemetery. I don't know why I hadn't made the connection before. The road, the building, the photos, it all led back to this. The drive to the cemetery was tense, even though nothing unusual happened. I half expected the car to start acting up again, but the McLaren was silent, almost like it wanted me to go there. When I pulled into the gravel lot, the place was completely empty. No visitors, no groundskeepers, just rows of old weathered headstones stretching out in every direction. I grabbed the jar from my backpack and stepped out of the car. The air felt heavier here, like the ground itself was holding its breath. I wandered through the rows of graves looking for, well, I wasn't sure what I was looking for. A sign? A name? Anything. And then I saw it. A headstone near the back of the cemetery, partially hidden by overgrown grass. The name etched into the stone sent chills through me. Not the dramatic Hollywood kind of chills, just the quiet, unsettling realization that I'd finally found the connection. Dr. Edward O'Connell, Marcus's great-uncle. The dates on the headstone matched the timeline of the sanitarium. Dr. O'Connell had died in 1952, right around the time the facility shut down. But it wasn't the name or the dates that caught my attention. It was the small circular indentation at the base of the headstone. It was the exact same size as the jar. I knelt down, hesitating for just a moment before placing the jar into the indentation. For a second, nothing happened. The cemetery was as still and silent as before. But as I stood up, I noticed the smell. The faint metallic scent I'd first noticed back in the building was gone. It was like the air had cleared. I didn't stick around to see if anything else would happen. I got back in the McLaren, turned the key, and drove away without looking back. The car didn't fight me this time. The GPS stayed off. The engine purred smoothly. And for the first time since I'd bought it, the interior felt Normal. When I got home, I parked the McLaren in the garage and locked it. I haven't driven it since. That night I did one last search on Marcus O'Connell. I wanted to know why he'd gone through so much trouble to hide the jar, and why he'd kept photos of the sanitarium in the first place. That's when I found a single sentence buried in an old article about the sanitarium's closure. Rumors persist that Dr. Edward O'Connell conducted unsanctioned experiments on patients, including attempts to bind consciousness to objects. I don't know if the rumors are true. I don't even know if the jar was connected to the car in the way I think it was. But here's what I do know. The McLaren hasn't acted up since I returned the jar. It's just a car now. Fast, beautiful, and completely ordinary. I'd like to think the curse is broken, but I'm not taking any chances. The car is up for sale, listed well below market value. And if you're wondering if it's still cursed, well, that's for the next owner to find out. A lot of you are asking for the link to the listing. Sorry, I'm not sharing it. Let's just say you're better off not getting involved.